It isn't often we discuss kind of health-based issues in there. We talk about the NHS, but the finer points of health, particularly mental health, and I think as blokes, and there's bound to be a disproportionate amount of men listening to this right now, we don't sort of touch on it that much. And there's probably a wide space there to have a good old chat about this kind of stuff, bearing in mind how many blokes suffer in silence. But there's mental health, and then there is what you might refer extreme mental health, areas that are in completely different, sometimes uncharted waters of psychosis and challenge when it comes to what goes on in another human being's head. Do we even have the right services to tackle extreme mental health? We all remember the horrific day in Nottingham when 3 people were brutally murdered by the psychotic killer Valdo Calocane. This was June the 13th last year. Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar, both 19, and 65-year-old Ian Coates didn't stand a chance against the level of paranoid brutality used against them. Calocane went on a rampage through the streets of Nottingham, killing both Grace and Barnaby with a knife and then returning from a night out before stabbing Mr. Coates to death near the school where he worked as a caretaker. He then stole Mr. Coates' van and drove into pedestrians. They were Wayne Burkitt, Marcin Gawrowski and Sharon Miller, inflicting very serious injuries. He was eventually caught and sentenced to what they call a hospital order, most probably for the rest of his life. And of course the question, as Julia was raising, is asked time and time again, so often the case when it transpires that somebody had been under the care of mental health authorities, could this have been avoided? The families of those attacks say those responsible for failings have blood on their hands. And I think we can all understand that. The review published by the Care Quality Commission, that's the CQC, has found a series of errors, omissions and judgments by mental health services. How often do we hear these kind of stories, whether it's about a death of a child, somebody acting out, or somebody carrying out the ultimate crime of murder? The new report by the health watchdog has revealed that Calocane was sectioned under the Mental Health Act 4 times before the NHS lost track of him and then discharged him. Now, right there, you'd say, well, somebody discharged him. Is there an individual that did? Is it standard practice? The CQC identified 5 missed opportunities to deal with the violent psychosis in the 3 years before the killing. So we can begin to get a picture here of what was going wrong. I'll give you some more details in a second, but in a joint statement from the families, they say this report demonstrates gross systemic failures in the Mental Health Trust in their dealings with Calocane from beginning to end. Clinicians involved at every stage of his care must bear a heavy burden of responsibility for their failures and poor decision-making. Sadly, this is the first of what we expect to be a series of damning reports concerning failures by public bodies in the lead-up to the killings of our loved ones and beyond. Along with Leicestershire and Nottinghamshire police forces, these departments and individual professionals have blood on their hands. I mean, this is damning stuff, and anybody that would have worked in that area around this case will be thinking they're talking about me here. But of course, if you spoke to those individuals, they will likely tell you, actually, no, that isn't how it worked. When you write it down, it looks terrible, but we were doing what we've always done, and this is our job. It's worth looking what was going on here. In the report, they say that Calocane's record they reviewed Calocane's record alongside 10 other cases. Now, the reason they used 10 other cases was to enable them to benchmark where his case was against the others. They said it had engaged with the families and the victims, but the watchdog did not interview or speak to any staff members involved in the offender's care at the trust. I think the idea was that they would get an objective view first, perhaps. The report found the 32-year-old, this is Calocane, a former University of Nottingham student, had first come into contact with the trust in May 2020. This was back in the lockdown era. Documents showed that he was acutely unwell. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and sectioned 4 times in less than 2 years. 4 times. The clue might be there. You haven't got to be Columbo to be working this out. The report said that key risks had either been missed or omitted, including the refusal of medicine, ongoing and persistent symptoms of psychosis, levels of violence against others when his psychosis was not managed well, and his escalation of violence towards others in the latter stages of his care under the trust. You might think, reading this, that somebody somewhere, and there would have been, I would guess, a couple of dozen people up close and personal to this case. Somebody somewhere must have gone, this bloke must not be allowed anywhere near the general public. Or is our understanding of psychosis, even those that supposedly work in an expert field of medicine, is it that bad? Do we have the right services to tackle this? Or is this one of those cases where you think there's an answer, but actually there isn't? And there's always going to be evil among us. There's always going to be people whose evil manifests from a mental health condition. And the list goes on. And we can crow about it all we like. And we can make accusations against staff people. And by the way, the family of these poor people whose lives were lost in the most brutal way have absolutely the right to accuse those responsible for having blood on their hands. Who would not be? You would be apoplectic while grieving. Your senses of injustice, of what could have been, what should have been, would be off the scale on something like that. How could so many people, so many agencies, so many clinicians, doctors, experts, people who excel in this field, paid handsomely by the public purse to do specifically this? It's not like this was another job on the side. They were a bus driver in the week, but at the weekend they helped down at the local mental health ward down at the hospital. Wasn't that? These are experts. Nobody spotted the dangers in this man. That is a travesty. And it makes you wonder, firstly, how good some of these people actually are. And I know there are people who are amazing in this world. But do we even have the right services to tackle extreme mental health?